Hey, everybody. I'm going to turn my lights on here. There we go. It's good to see that we already have 7 people on, waiting, ready to go tonight. We'll make this, I'll try to make it short. Looking at the test for tomorrow, looks like we have 30 questions, which is nice. It's a little bit shorter than normal as we wrap up chapter 24 and get deep into chapter 26. So, nope, I've already lost 2. 34 seconds in, and I've already bored to death. 2 people have dropped off the map. So if you hear shouting in the background, it's probably my kids. It's bedtime, and when Dad isn't there to crack the whip, sometimes things get a little hairy. But we went and did some family painting. We've got the llama art up there. Each of us made a llama. I wonder if you can tell which one is mine. But okay. So we are wrapping up the Industrial Revolution, and we're looking at the end of Native American resistance and the establishment of farming and agricultural lifestyle in the Midwest and the beginning of the populist movement. Okay, so hopefully you're logged in with your own personal account and you can text me or message me questions. If you have questions at any point, be sure you get those up there. But let me go and begin looking at what my notes I have here for review. Okay. So let's start off with labor. Okay. We talked about several different labor organizations: the NLU, the National Labor Union, the Knights of Labor, and the American Federation of Labor. Okay. Which of those organizations ultimately was most influential because it was exclusive in its membership? It limited the membership to skilled artisans only. It was also kind of reflective of the racist times where it did not allow for women and people of color to be involved. But because it limited its membership to skilled artisans only, and it focused on mediation and negotiation, it ultimately was the last of the big labor organizations to be successful. McKenna's going with the NLU. So lock in your answers: NLU, the Knights of Labor, or American Federation Labor. American Federation of Labor is going to be the right answer. Okay. McKenna, the NLU was the first labor union. Keep in mind that they also, they tended to, they were racist for sure. They were exclusive. They barred women. They barred people of color, specifically African Americans and the Chinese, but they were open to unskilled labor. Okay. So the Knights of Labor, probably the most open, welcome. We get people like, oh gosh, having a hard time remembering her name. But we get women involved in the Knights of Labor. We get people of color involved in the Knights of Labor. But it is short-lived and ends about the time the Haymarket Square bombing. And because of the recession, unskilled labor is pretty disposable. And so the influence of the Knights of Labor disappears. Okay. moving away from labor, we've talked about several Supreme Court cases. Which amendment to the Constitution is going to not only protect people and say that people have equal rights under the law, but the Supreme Court during the end of the 19th century is going to say, since people make up corporations, corporations are protected, have equal protection under the law. What amendment grants equal protection and has kind of become this broad catch-all for equal protection? Keeping in mind, we've got several Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th. That should help narrow down your options. Okay, McKenna's asking me to repeat. So what amendment is the Supreme Court going to use during the tail end of the 19th century to protect the rights of corporations? This particular amendment says people are entitled to equal treatment under the law. And the court is going to rule that since corporations are made up of people, corporations also receive equal protection under the law. Who is Dr. Haxer 75? Kyler Essink and Dr. Haxer, Ariana, you're right. The 14th Amendment is correct. I didn't realize I had a doctor tuning in. I wonder if it's a PhD. Oh, it's Nick. Hi, Nick. Dr. Haxer. I don't even do I want to know what that means? Okay. Yeah, the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. Same amendment that the courts have used to interpret that people have a constitutional right to marriage, regardless of their sexual orientation. It was at this time in the 19th century is being used to say that corporations have equal protection under the law. You can't somehow pass laws or take property or limit a corporation's rights simply because it's a successful business. That since corporations are made up of people, they're protected under the law. Most of our court decisions during this time are going to favor corporations. Okay. When you're dealing with big business and you're dealing with their efforts to fight off labor movements, okay, we have several different tactics that corporations use to prevent people from organizing as laborers. Can you list me some? What kind of actions did corporations take against people that were trying to organize as laborers? Pay cuts, getting fired, you bet. fear and intimidation, those kinds of things. We have the Pinkertons that come in, wage cuts. What was a nickname for contracts that employees agreed to that said they would not join a labor union? Think about, I'll give you a hint. Think of golden retrievers and Labradors. Also, think about lists of people that, or what was the name for the list that labor organizers would end up on, and so other businesses wouldn't hire them. Blacklists, yes. The use of blacklists. The name of the contract I was referring to, yellow dog contracts. So usually it's pretty well assumed that golden retrievers and Labradors are like the most well-behaved, most like compliant dogs there are. And so a compliant dog, yep, Miley, yellow dog contracts that you would follow your master's orders without any objection. Nobody mentioned lockouts, the fact that if there was some kind of a protest or a strike, that employers would call the bluff of strikers and lock them out, basically starve them out of their strike. Keep in mind that businesses owned the company town. Places like Pullman, Indiana, the name of the town is the name of the company, and they own the housing, they own the grocery store, they own the banks, and so if you got out of line, they had plenty of ways to punish you as an employee. Okay. Now let's talk about successes, or as far as how the AFL, for example, the American Federation of Labor, how they negotiated some successes for their employees. Okay, what kind of business or what kind of model did the AFL use where all the workers of a business would be labor members? What do we call that when all of the workers in a factory belong to the AFL? Yes, Michael's got it. Closed shop. All right. So business owners had lots of different tactics to throw their weight around. Labor unions, they negotiated some important things as well. One way they increased their strengths in the factory was through the closed shop model, where they would agree to work well for the company. Typically, you had to be a skilled laborer, and so your work was in high demand. That they would negotiate as opposed to walk off and strike, but in return, a company would use the closed shop model, which meant only hire labor members. Okay. Women start to enter the workplace. Okay. Women start to enter the workplace. This is a concern for a lot of white male laborers because women will work for less oftentimes. They're more compliant or malleable, or at least that's the prejudice. Okay. What kinds of women, okay, from what background were women who worked most likely to come from? So think about like the shirtwaist factory girls. Immigrants, that's a good answer. Upper, middle, lower classes. Right. Yeah, that's a pretty easy answer. Migrant groups, lower class, oftentimes girls from rural areas where their family had failed at farming would end up in factories. And so it wasn't a matter of choice. You know, we see today in society that women are entering the workforce in record numbers, going to school in record numbers, and that choosing to be independent and self-sufficient is something that people strive for. At this time, the whole cult of domesticity is still around, and so women who don't need to work typically choose not to. Okay. One of the things we kind of skimmed over in chapter 24 is the South and the Southern economy. Okay. We talked about how one particular individual is responsible for making a tobacco conglomeration. What is that man's name? He organizes the tobacco producers of the South to create the American Tobacco Federation. I'll give you a hint. There's a college named after him in North Carolina. James Duke, right? Yep. The American Tobacco Federation or American Tobacco Company. Very good. James Duke. So the South's economy is going to take several decades to start even reproducing the amount of cotton that they had been producing before the war. The growth of business, especially corporate business, is going to be relatively slow. One exception to this is the tobacco industry. We're going to start to see corporate farms for tobacco where one business owns thousands of acres, mass producing hand-rolled cigarettes. All right. What is another name for a trust? Think about what kind of business model is synonymous with trust. We got a couple of different options: horizontal, vertical, or interlocking directorates. Think about the game Monopoly. Okay. Monopoly is another word for it, Miley, but is that going to be horizontal, vertical, or an interlocking directorate? With Monopoly, you want to control all of the same color. With a trust, you want to control all the same line of production, right? You want to own all the utilities or all the railroads or all of the reds, the blues. My personal favorite are the greens. And so a trust is a horizontal integration. Okay, think about, probably the best example would be J.D. Rockefeller with Standard Oil. Okay, so we get the Sherman Antitrust Act trying to break up monopolies. Ooh, we're guessing all over the place. The answer, and I'm not sure why answers are still coming in. The correct answer is horizontal integration. Monopolies are horizontal integration. That another nickname for that is a trust. McKenna wants to know what the difference between horizontal and vertical is. So horizontal is owning all of the business on one stage of production. So for example, J.D. Rockefeller owned all the oil refineries, right? Taking crude oil and turning it into gasoline or kerosene or motor oil. That's one stop, taking it and making it usable. Andrew Carnegie is a better example of vertical integration. He wanted to own all of the steps for one. He wanted to own all of the steps related to steel. Okay, so he wanted to own the mines, the iron mines. He wanted to own the railroads that took the iron to the Great Lakes. He wanted to own the boats that would take the iron and coal from the Mesabi Iron Range in Minnesota across the Great Lakes to Pennsylvania. He wanted to own the steel factories that would use the Bessemer process. He wanted to, if Andrew Carnegie could have found a use for llamas, Katie, then he would have owned the llamas too. He owned the steel factories that are going to turn the iron into steel. He's going to own the coal companies that are going to provide the fuel for the trains and for the steel factories. So vertical is owning everything from the mine to the storefront. Okay. Horizontal is owning all of one stage. So all the railroads or all of the oil refineries. McKenna, does that make sense for people that who are confused about the difference? You're welcome. Okay. Now, we have the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Okay, this is one of those first major laws that is aiming at trying to control industry and production and that kind of thing. Okay, but almost more commonly than breaking up monopolies, how did it get used by President Cleveland? Who did President Cleveland target, citing the Sherman Antitrust Act? So it's supposed to be for big business, but how did it get turned around? So just as kind of a reminder, the Sherman Antitrust Act was supposed to stop actions that would be bad for trade, bad for the economy, bad for trade. But Cleveland is going to use the Sherman Antitrust Act to attack unions. Is correct, JD. Very good deduction there. Yep. Because unions, organized labor, are going to sort of, at least according to Cleveland, unions are like a horizontal trust of labor. And so even though the Sherman Antitrust Act was supposed to attack monopolies, it's going to be used to break up labor unions more frequently than it is going to be attacking monopolies. More monopolies are created under the Sherman Antitrust Act than before it. So just again, representing how big moneyed interests seem to be stomping over labor, farmers. The government seems to be run by corporate interest. Please tell me if this isn't making sense. I realize this is like really kind of foreign stuff to you guys to be thinking about corporations and labor unions and how government creates one set of laws, but then it's abused and used for a totally different purpose and that kind of thing. So please be sure that if it's like, well, just this sounds like gobbledygook, please tell me, and I'll try to come up with a more meaningful or articulate way of explaining it. But it's corruption, right? It's a seesaw. I always like to think of politics and history as a pendulum. We get the labor unions and we get the farmers demanding more control. So something like the Sherman Antitrust Act is passed, and that's going to upset big business, and it gets turned around sideways. So big business uses the Sherman Antitrust Act to attack labor, and it just goes back and forth. Could I come up with an example? Okay. Well, we know that the Knights of Labor take on the railroad, right? We talked about Jay Gould's Wabash Railroad. And we're going to talk about Wabash a couple of different times. But this big railroad company is making record profits, but they hit a slow year. You hit a recession. And so rather than cutting profits, Jay Gould cuts jobs. He starts firing people, laying them off, and that kind of thing. So the Wabash Railroad workers protest. They strike. They walk off the job in protest for greater wages and more job protection. Well, as a response to that, to punish the railroad workers, the strike is declared as illegal because these strikers are harming the restraining trade. If they don't get back to work, the company can't make money. The railroad can't do its business. It slows down the transportation of goods and services. So President Cleveland uses the Sherman Antitrust Act to declare the strike as unconstitutional or as illegal, and to threaten the use of military force against the strikers. Okay, so to break up this peaceful protest, so to speak. And we're going to see that with the Pullman strike as well in the 1890s. And we'll talk about that when we start a new unit and we're looking at the election of the 1890s. Does that make sense, Katie? So what was created to protect the people from big business and its abuses ends up being used by big business to squash worker protests. Yep. Okay. So keep in mind the Sherman Antitrust Act, the whole point of that is to promote positive trade. The assumption is big business is bad for trade because if one company controls a monopoly, they can set prices, they can squash competition, and that's bad for trade. But at the same time, presidents like Cleveland and business interests are going to say, well, labor unions are bad for trade too. They slow things down, they stop production, it makes things more expensive because of a lack of availability. All right. So let's talk about the gospel of wealth. Okay. What scientific theory or scientific theory is used to support this gospel of wealth? The kind of attitude that industrialists had about making money. What scientific theory seems to support the attitude business owners had about their ability to make money and government's lack of intervention. Absolutely, McKenna, you got it right. Michael, right. Survival of the fittest, natural selection, that nature, social Darwinism, Thunderboy 1K. You bet. I love that name, Thunderboy. I better not find out who that is, or that's your new nickname in class. This idea that natural selection has created a better breed of human, and that these businessmen deserve their wealth, like J.P. Morgan or Rockefeller said, God gave me my money. Oh, Sean, Thunderboy. All right, that's it. Yep, and fortunately, people like Andrew Carnegie did have a social conscience, in the sense that, yes, God gave us our wealth, but we have a social responsibility. And so philanthropy becomes a big thing, where he's putting a lot of his money into social programs, especially in the Pennsylvania area, the Pittsburgh area, the places that his companies are, because there's a need for social improvement. But the notion that the government shouldn't intervene because these people deserve their money, they're a better class of people, and that the best thing the government can do is stay out of the way or help them make more money, and that society will be better because of that. That's just kind of assumed in the day of the height of Charles Darwin's popularity. Okay. Now, we talked about the Knights of Labor already. The Knights of Labor was inclusive. It allowed women to participate. It allowed people of color to participate. There is a small group of individuals that are not permitted membership of the Knights of Labor. Okay. Can you identify a couple of the different groups who couldn't join the Knights of Labor?
Okay.
While people kind of investigate that question, McKenna, you're asking, was Andrew Carnegie the only one who cared about giving back? Because the way things seemed, everyone was kind of a jerk. No, he wasn't the only one. I mean, most of these folks gave some money. Yeah, Kyler, Carnegie writes the Gospel of Wealth. But like, you go to New York City and you'll see Rockefeller Center, and there are lots of buildings and things, art museums that were built by the Vanderbilts and J.P. Morgan, and that he's the most famous and probably the most generous of the philanthropists, probably the most, I think, compassionate of especially the titans of industry we've been talking about. But they all gave a little. Carnegie was probably just the most vocal. He writes the Gospel of Wealth. He donates a lot, but at the same time, he wanted his name plastered on everything. It's part of his legacy. Okay, the correct answer for groups that were not allowed to participate in the Knights of Labor, JD's got it: lawyers, bankers, stockbrokers, did I say bankers already? And then non-producers, or people that were wrapped up in vice. Okay, gamblers. The liquor business was not permitted. And again, that kind of reflects the role of women at this time because of the temperance movement. Liquor distributors, professional gamblers, those kinds of professions associated with the breakdown of the family were not permitted to be members of the Knights of Labor. Let's move into chapter 26 then, dealing with Native Americans and the end of their resistance to being moved onto the reservation. Okay, I'm confused. Did the gospel of wealth support charity, or did they only see themselves deserving to be on the top? Okay, so I kind of use gospel of wealth as a catch-all. The gospel of wealth was actually a book. Okay, um, Andrew Carnegie writes a book or a pamphlet called The Gospel of Wealth. So it affirms the things we've been talking about. The wealthy deserve their money, right? That they are there because of natural selection, because they're a better class of people, in a respect that this is God's design, that some people are better humans than other people. So that's principle A. But principle B in this book that Carnegie writes is that as the better class, that they have a responsibility to society to take care of those less fortunate, that it's not a pleasant place to be. The world is not a pleasant place to be if people live in despair, right? And that the wealthy have a responsibility to promote social welfare. Okay, so it's not just about charity giving handouts. Okay, it's not about just like soup kitchen, feed a man for a day, but that you have to invest in social works that are good for society, that educate and enlighten and lift people up. That's why you'll see Carnegie's name attached to libraries, art museums, schools, all that kind of sort of liberal arts education stuff. The Andrew Carnegie Library Fund is huge. A lot of libraries built with money from the Carnegie Foundation. If you tune into NPR, if you're somebody that listens to, talk radio, NPR radio, you'll hear oftentimes it's sponsored by the Carnegie Foundation. So sort of like Bill and Melinda Gates, the owner of Microsoft, their money goes towards works they see as having important social value. Okay, hope that answers your question, Mike. Okay. Kyler, if school gets canceled tomorrow, will the test be on Monday? What do you think I would make you take it online tomorrow at home? I just am curious what your alternative would be. Are we crossing our fingers and toes? I just keep thinking about if I have to come back after Memorial Day, that's going to really blow. But for APUSH, at this point, the AP test is May 10th. For every day we add to the end of the calendar, it's just one more movie day, which is not so bad. But it's one less day we have to prepare. Kyler is asking the real question. We've all considered it. The test is made. I don't know. You tell me, Kyler, what the better option is. But yeah, I think it'd be Monday. So I've got a question here about Native American resistance. Okay. In your guys' take-home test, this is the shortest test I'm giving, so that I've given so far. It's like 30 questions. So this is kind of a broad question, so I want you to think about it. It's not necessarily written down in your notes, but under what conditions did Native Americans stop their resistance? Okay, when would they surrender their lands? Under what conditions were they did they cooperate with the will of the U.S. government? So they would only surrender after the buffalo were exterminated. And Michael's going to say with treaties, if they were offered peace when they had no alternative. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I mean, we're circling around the bullseye, but we haven't hit it yet. And Ariana's getting the closest when the resources ran out or they were given promises. This whole idea of promises, and those of you that are mentioning treaties, that's really, really close. That basically, the trail of broken treaties, they were offered land. Obviously, part of it is they're promised to keep some land in exchange for giving up other land. They're promised services, and they're promised resources, and they're promised that the land that they get to keep forever. And so those of you that are talking about promises and treaties, that is the crux of the question I'm asking here. They're trying to save their people. They're desperate. They want peace. They also want to maintain their lifestyle. And so it's not as though they were savage warriors hell-bent on fighting to the very last man. But what they wanted was to make sure that their future was secure. So they would cooperate so long as they were given promises of land and resources and that kind of thing. The problem was that over the generations, that gets whittled down further and further to the point where today they're on reservations. The land there it's not great land. They can't be self-sufficient in the places that they're at. And so they've become entirely dependent on government aid. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. This is sort of a trivia question. Who are the Buffalo Soldiers? Very good. Black soldiers. Yay. What initiated a new round of fighting between the U.S. government and Native Americans in the Dakotas around 1874? What's going to be discovered in the Dakotas? Yep, in the Black Hills, right? So the South Dakota, let's speak specific, the South Dakota Gold Rush or the Dakota Gold Rush, Black Hills Gold Rush. Have lots of gold rushes. 1848, 1858, 1874. But Custer's expedition in the Black Hills is going to initiate a new round of conflict there. Can you give me some causes for the near extermination of the buffalo? Causes, give me, top 2 or 3 causes for the buffalo's extermination. Yay! Katie with the railroad. Yep, migration, overhunting. Yep, very good. All right. This is probably going to be the toughest since it was towards the end of the Native American stuff and we could only touch on it briefly. Hopefully, you read about it and took some notes on this on your own. But the big capstone, as far as legislation goes, as far as the government is concerned, one of the final acts to culturally destroy the Native Americans is the Dawes Act. Okay? So with the Dawes Act, tell me what you know about the Dawes Act as far as what is the Dawes Act going to do to the Native Americans to culturally take them out? Right, Katie. One of the things is it's going to try to convert them into, independent landowners. So it's going to remove tribal ownership of land and basically give every Native American 160 acres of land and teach them to farm. Michael, very good. The whole notion that if they behaved for 25 years, a quarter of a century, that they could become citizens of the United States. It's going to give them land to the head of the household. Very good. It's going to eliminate the tribe's sovereignty. Okay. Today, tribes have sovereignty again, but that's not going to take place till close to World War II. It's going to take away tribal sovereignty. It's going to give them independent parcels of land. It's going to push this idea of being an independent farmer like the whites. It's going to set up Native American schools for the children. So it's considered, one of these, it was well-intentioned, but it's incredibly racist and borders on cultural genocide. Okay, very good. I'm glad to see that you guys had some solid answers for that. All right, let's move into the final frontier, looking at farming, mining, and agriculture. Identify a few opportunities, and I mean this kind of broadly, that women had on the frontier. That they didn't have in other places. So, what kind of positive opportunities did women have? The right to vote. Great. I'm glad the first answer wasn't prostitution. Okay. Yes, prostitution, ownership of hotels, bars, small business ownership and that kind of thing. The opportunity to work, yeah, but the few women that lived in the West ultimately proved their worth, as if women have to prove their worth, and voting rights come a lot earlier, faster in those places. Very good, Kyler. Let's see here. If I miss anything. Okay. Where would you most likely find a Sooner? Yep. Oklahoma. Those Sooners ready to pounce on land in Oklahoma, some of them moving in there before it was even open to settlement, thinking that it was going to be a state sooner or later. Boomer Sooners. Is that a college reference? Because I don't get it. All right. Let's talk about the safety valve. Okay. What was more common? People moving from the city to strike a new life in the country, or people in the country failing in the country and having to move to the city? Good. I'm glad to see we're almost unanimous. Yes. As much as we like to think that the West was this place of opportunity and prosperity, more people end up failing in the country. And obviously, they had to come from somewhere, but failing in the country and having to move back to the city than people that had established themselves in the city and moved out to the country. Maybe a little bit of an accordion effect where you try it and then you fail and you come back. But the safety valve theory that's talked about in chapter 26, more people end up coming back to the city or moving from the country to the city than vice versa. What do you think the two most significant causes of farmers' problems were during this time? So in the final 30 years of the 19th century, what are going to be identify two of the most serious problems for farmers? Okay. So we've talked about the 4Ds. What are going to be the worst? Okay. So I would propose this: of all of those problems, deflation, lack of access to money, and the dropping prices of grain because of mechanization, those are going to be the worst, right? Every class today had at least one farmer in it or somebody connected to agriculture, which to me is just bizarre because Nebraska is an agricultural state. But of all of our farm friends, each of them told you right away the thing that controls whether a farmer is successful or not is grain prices. And because of mechanization, prices are dropping. That's number one. And then number two are the 4Ds and deflation, debt, desperation, depression and drought. Those are all very significant. Okay. So despite all of the troubles and hazards problems farmers had, why were they so slow to organize? Okay, why is it, what is it about farmers that make it, they seem to suffer for a long time? What makes them slow to organize? Yeah, Ariana, I don't know if it's fair to say they don't want to work together, but they certainly are individualists that pride themselves in their independence. It's not like they're antisocial, but they, we have this idea of the American dream, and that goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, that the most American thing to do is to make something of yourself in the soil, to pick yourself up by the bootstraps, to be an independent farmer, to take something as raw as the land and make something profitable. And so there's that kind of American spirit and dream romance with being an independent person. And so they're very individualistic. Yeah. Your answer just sounds like they don't play well with others, and maybe that's the case. But farmers that I know tend to be very compassionate, good neighbors. It's just they're not looking for people to help them. Okay. What was the first major farm organization? Okay, what's the first major organization? And I'll take the short name for it because it's pretty big. Nope, not the Greenbacks. Yep. The very first one is the Grangers. Okay, what is the most significant contribution of the Grangers? Like, what was probably the most important thing they did for farmers in the early parts of the 1870s as they become or 1860s and 70s? Education, social impact. Yep, that's exactly right. Remember, life on the farm, depression is a two-way street. Economic depression affects prices, obviously, with banks and interest rates. But the whole isolation, if you watch Little House on the Prairie, if you read Little Women or Giants in the Earth, it's terribly desolate. And so the Grangers provide social opportunities and also educational opportunities, that kind of thing. So what was the name of the Granger we read about today? Female impact on the West and the farm life. Who was the Granger that said we need to plant less and raise more hell? Yeah. Izzy, did you like Mary Lease? Plant less corn, raise more hell. She's a cool chick. All right. Mary Lease, populist, Granger. Oh, we're almost done, folks. Okay. The Grangers tried but failed at passing laws. Oh, okay. I'm going to ask a question here, McKenna, about the Grangers that may get towards what you're looking at. Okay, but the Grangers were a farm society. Okay, they were a social and political organization. They weren't especially impactful on the national level, but in certain states where they had a large presence, they really tried to change and shape state laws to support farmers. But where they were really most successful was organizing farmers socially, where they brought farmers together for social occasions. They held dances and concerts and lectures. They put together publications about how to farm better, to improve your farming for whatever region you were in. But they did attempt to write laws and try to pass laws at the local level, at the state level. Okay, this is where we're going with this. What particular organization did the Grangers target? Okay, thinking about the laws they passed, what organization, especially in places like Illinois, hint, hint, what organization did the Grangers try to target with their laws? Railroads. Absolutely. And now we found our way back to Wabash versus Indiana, or Wabash versus Illinois or Indiana. Why am I blanking on that? At any rate, the Wabash case, right? The Supreme Court rules that whose responsibility is it to regulate the railroads? The national or state level? Wabash versus Illinois. Yep, Katie's got it. First on the board. That it's the national. Oh no, Katie. Oh, I'm misreading your statement. It's national. Disregard what I said. Sorry, I wanted to give you credit. It's the national level that's responsible for regulating railroads because railroads go between two or more states. They go between two or more states, which means it's an interstate issue, and the Constitution gives the national government control over interstate issues. That's Wabash, the Wabash Railroad case. Okay. Hey, we've talked a little bit about gold and silver here. I think we've talked about it plenty, actually. But here's another trivial question about gold and silver. What state led the nation in production of silver and gold after 1859? So we're looking at the second gold rush. California is not the answer. What state became the Comstock state? Sammy gets yep, Sammy and Kyler have it. It is Nevada. Okay. Comstock is the correct answer, or Nevada is the correct answer. Becomes the silver mine of the United States. So have you ever wondered, outside of Vegas, what made anyone want to go to Nevada? It was the mining industry. Okay, last question. We've made our way to the populists. Okay, the Populist Party, the most successful third party in American history, coming out of this tradition of farmers organizing and actually connecting with laborers, and so the farmers and laborers putting together this populist movement. What kinds of changes to national laws did they support? Unlimited coinage of silver, right? We saw a little bit of success in 1878 with with one of the coinage acts where, yeah, they're going to buy up some silver. A graduated income tax, right? Make those fat cats pay more. Pay more if you have more. So that's graduated income tax. Okay. What was their attitude about loans? JD, who should they be able to get loans from? What do you mean national loans? Who should they be able to take out a loan with? The government. Yep. Banks are in the business of making money. If they could get a loan through the government, right? The government could issue a loan with a low interest rate, and that would be for their betterment. Exactly, Kyler. All right. And what about these railroads? What should be done with these businesses like railroad companies, telephone and telegraph companies that are charging an arm and a leg to individuals for their services? What should be done with those important transportation and communication systems? All right. Ariana says nationalize them. What does that mean? Should be run by the government, right? So I want you guys to remember this. I mean, you guys, well, I'll probably be out of the picture. I'll be a bad, distant memory as we fire up the campaigns for the 2020 election. But as you listen to Grandpa Bernie Sanders talk about national health care, or you listen to these conversations about socialism and whether socialism is American or not, or if this is some kind of new phenomenon, realize those debates are not new. It's not new at all. It's been controversial. It's been a matter of debate for over 100 years, but that the parties are different, right? The population that supports one idea or over another is different. But these are the kind of same old things that we've tested through history. And so ultimately we need to balance private interest, private greed with public good. I think I said that sometime last week. Private greed versus public good. That's the direction we're headed as we get into the progressive era, Teddy Roosevelt in the 20th century. All right. I have taken up 1 hour and 7 minutes. I hope that satisfies you. Any other questions? Happy to do it. You guys are great. It's worth it to spend time with you. I'm so happy to see those of you that have stuck with this succeed. And so we'll see you tomorrow, I think. I don't know. Are we hoping for a snow day? You're welcome. Have a great night.